So, big hello and thank you to Charlotte for joining us today. I would love you to just take a second to introduce yourself to the people watching today. Who are you? What do you do? Give us the lowdown.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, so my name is Charlotte Lewis. I'm based in South Wales. I'm a public speaking coach or consultant, and I help people to look, sound, and feel more natural when they're taking on those public speaking challenges. So, public speaking has got a kind of weird rap. We don't really stick the word public on front of anything else. So it really does just mean speaking. But when we say public speaking, people get an idea of, it's a keynote, it's wedding speeches, it's job
Mhm.
interviews, all of those higher pressure stake situations. That's what I like to help people with.
Love that. And this is not our first time collaborating. And for those of
Mm.
you who follow either of us, you may have seen we've already done Instagram lives together. We've chatted endlessly behind the scenes, and I think there's a lot of overlap between myself and Charlotte on our thoughts and our take around how public speaking is actually an asset to your business. So I will prompt you first off to head over to Instagram and catch the replay of our live that we did where we talked about what public speaking is and how you can use it as a soft skill. But today we're going to focus in a little bit more specifically. Let me backtrack actually. So I have some experience in public speaking as running online workshops. Like that is my bread and
Mm,
butter for public speaking. It's not the getting up on a stage that people probably imagine when they think of public speaking,
yeah.
but it was massive for me in my business. And I
Mm,
really do tell a lot of people that they should start considering workshops, whether they're in person or online, as an opportunity to generate leads. And I think it's massively, massively underrated as an
it is
opportunity to position yourself as an expert. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And
great.
I I know it's exciting. I'm gonna geek out this whole session and be like, oh yeah, nice one this. So I'm gonna have to refrain and kind of hold it in a little bit.
Me too. Me too. I'm going to be
Yeah,
like, yes, you're just going to hear my voice bubbling along the way.
yeah. So I wanna, I mean, first off, hear your thoughts on just how lead generation and speaking can be used together and how they can tie in.
I think the most simple way of putting it is if you don't talk about what you do, no one's going to know.
Yeah.
No one's going to know. And I think we associate talking about what we do with something very arrogant and like we're showing off. But actually, it's just sharing. There
Mm.
might be someone out there who has been waiting to hear about what you do. And actually, in its very simplest terms, you're just giving them the opportunity, the sort of light bulb moment, or yeah, just that like, I've been waiting for you. And that's
Yeah.
often actually when I tell people what I do, they have that reaction. I go, oh, I really love doing this. And I think it's because of the conviction that I've learnt to foster. We all have imposter syndrome and things like that when
Hmm.
we're in our growth zone. And of course, that can feel a little bit like, oh God, I'm talking about all these things that I'm doing and I'm not sure if, I'm the best at it or whatever. But actually, just putting it out there and getting used to that and seeing how people receive, you'd be so surprised. Sometimes those people in your closest circle are your first leads.
Oh
And
yeah.
because you have that build, you've built that trust, you've built that relationship with them. So they trust you to do the next thing. And it's a lovely way of,
Mm.
building on your relationship, I think. So
Yeah, and
yeah.
I think it's really easy to overlook. And I'm going to say this as a marketing agency owner, as a social media manager, right? Like I love social media, but I
Mm,
think when we're constantly creating content and writing a lot about what we do, we can feel like I've said this till I'm blue in the face. Like I've told everyone
yes.
a million times over what I do.
Everybody knows.
Yeah. But realistically, how many people are seeing the post because of the
Mm,
algorithm? Even if you have done it 20 times, how many people have seen it? How many people are reading the full thing and getting to grips with everything?
yeah,
And not only that, there's something to be said for, like, especially if you do something that's a little bit more unique or technical, like even social media for some
sure.
people feels like a foreign language.
Yeah.
So to explain that written down, you're probably going to fall into using some jargon and kind of skimming over
Mm,
the high level view of things. Whereas if you're chatting to a friend about like, oh yeah, and we run people's social media for that, you will naturally simplify it when you say it out loud, I
yes.
feel anyway.
Yeah,
And then you get the
because you're
message across better.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're receiving information from how
Hmm.
they're receiving it.
Yeah.
So we do this really naturally because we're very generous as human beings. This is why putting yourself on social media or film or whatever can feel a little bit like daunting because we're like, I have no information as to how
Yeah.
my audience are receiving this right now. I don't know if I'm right, if I'm getting my point across, a video call so you can see when they're nodding, when they're affirming, when they're
Yeah.
furrowing their brow, when they're kind of going, they're taking that inhale, wanting to speak. And asking them to clarify or going like, what do you think about that is a really, really good exercise. There was a podcast that I was listening to the other day, and he said something that I say a lot. If I can get my mum to understand it, I can get anyone to understand
Mm.
it. So he live recorded his conversation about blockchain with his mum. And he said, do you get it? And she was like, not really, darling, but try harder and maybe talk about this. But I just thought that was a really lovely way of showing that rehearsal process of like, okay, how am I going to get the listeners, the end person to understand? I'll try it out with my
Hmm.
mum. You can do
Yeah.
the same. You've got
Yeah.
lovely, lovely friends who care about you, friends and family. Try it out with them first. And if they're going, you kind of went into jargon there. That was a bit weird. I've never seen you speak like that. Refine it. Or that's when
Hmm.
you work with a coach, for example, just to make sure that that inner stuff aligns with what's being delivered outwardly.
Yeah, that's funny because a lot of the people who are watching this have probably followed me for a while, and I always talk about what I lovingly call the NAN test, which is
Oh,
very similar.
great.
I send, well,
Yes.
it could be content, it could be little video clips, but I'll just randomly, even a tagline maybe or a title of something,
Yeah.
I'll just randomly drop in with my nan every now and then and be like, "What's your first thoughts when I say this?" And
It's
I get her feedback, and
perfect.
it's so good because she understands what I do in like I kind of if you take a step back and you look at the big picture of it, she gets it, but down to the
Yeah.
detail is probably a bit too much for her, and she's not
Yeah.
in the space, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
getting someone who's that little bit further away's perspective, it's nice. You're stepping outside of that echo chamber that we're all in, right? Like we all use the same terms, following
Absolutely.
each other on Instagram or wherever it may be, and it's nice to get someone who's not in there and
Mm.
hear how the perception is outside of that.
I love that, the NAN test. I'm going to steal that. That's really great. Yeah. It's just a way, again, of what I said in the very beginning, tapping into the public speaking challenges, but being natural.
Mm,
Because actually, those great speakers that you see out there, very few of them are using really big words or
yeah,
concepts that you feel like, bloody hell, I don't know how to talk about. Maybe someone like, Andrew Huberman, for example.
immediately came to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's a neuroscientist, and you kind
Yeah.
of go, look, that big word means something in the scientific journals, so it must mean something, and that might take a little bit longer to get your head around that. But knowledge is, in that field is worth persevering. And actually, that's something that I do think is quite interesting when brands talk about what they do. I think the entry point has to be really natural and universal and kind of get everyone on board. Then after that, there are sequences, as you say, as you get deeper into the knowledge, there are going to be things that are harder earned. They're not going to be so easy to understand. And that's where we have to think about, well, maybe we're going to have to talk about these for a longer time. Maybe we're going to have to do a little bit of research, all these other things that upskill yourself. Or you think at that point, I want to work with them because they know this stuff and they seem really comfortable talking about this complex stuff. And I'm listening to it going, oh my gosh, I actually want to know that, but I can't talk like that yet.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that actually moves us really nicely into the idea that I was saying that a lot of my clients from my agency came from workshops and came from putting myself in the position of having my own speaking events and
Ah,
positioning
right.
myself as my own expert. And I really struggled to generate leads in my agency when I first
Mm,
started out. I was side hustling for 2 years because I was really fighting that fight to bring in new customers. And I couldn't leave work until I figured that out and had enough clients coming in, right? I tried a few things and lots did work, but the standout for me was implementing workshops. And there was a few things that I did that probably helped. And for example, I used cold email outreach to find new
Mm,
contacts. And I invited them to a workshop instead of trying to sell them anything. I just invited them to a workshop. So that was really helpful. And there were other elements like email marketing and social that put towards it. But truly, I think I was just so much more comfortable talking about social media and being able to be
mm,
passionate and excited about it in a kind of spoken setting than I
mm,
was trying to put it down into written word and trying to get the point across of why someone needed to work with me on social media. Even as a social media expert, I still found that really jarring. And the way you broke that down there is truly, I think that I was speaking in such a way where I was so passionate and I was
mm.
talking about complex things. I was breaking down algorithms like as if it was nothing, because to me it
Exactly.
wasn't. That it then put me in the shoes of an expert to those people, and they
Mm,
saw not only what I did, but what I could do for them because I could
mm,
just but really quickly give them the lowdown of here's how I could help you in this
mm,
setting. And I want people to consider that. And I wanted
mm,
your thoughts on how people can make sure that if they want to go down this route and they think about implementing workshops, how they can get the most out of it. Because you've got that speaking background and because you're so brilliant at breaking down those scary thoughts about public speaking and making it feel really accessible. And yeah, I just wanted to hear what comes to mind for you in that space.
Oh, that's really nice that you say I'm good at breaking that down. I think it's basically because I was in that situation. I don't
Mhm.
talk about this that often, and people go, "Oh, Charlotte, she definitely wasn't ever shy or wasn't ever
Yeah.
outgoing." I hid a lot of that nervousness. I was very, very good at kind of masking. But on underneath, I was terrified. And it came out of being on a directing course and finally doing something that I really wanted to do. And it was really worth, like, it was very prestigious. And I didn't quite fully understand how prestigious it was until I turned up there. And then suddenly I was like, whoa, I'm out my depth.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit like that moment that you're describing there, where you're like, how am I going to prove that I'm good at what I do? And it's that step, right, where you make it into a business or something like that. How am I going to be inspiring? So you just need to get out and speak about it. It's absolutely the same. A similar thing happened where I was like trying to write this into an essay. And I was like, I don't know how to do this. And I hadn't realized until a couple of years earlier that I was dyspraxic as well. So
Right.
things like organized thought, discipline, getting things in certain orders just weren't at my disposal as well. And I was wondering, how does everyone else find this so easy? But I think when you're mustering up the courage, and look, you can do this in sort of stages. For me, it felt very all or nothing, and it might have felt similar to you, but you can just start by speaking alone out loud, like
Hmm.
setting up a room, making sure everyone's out the house, and imagining you are taking that workshop. That's
Yeah.
it. But when you speak out loud, so there's a fascinating thing that happens in the brain where the real and imagined, they are separate and they're not completely like, okay, the brain doesn't know the difference. It does know the difference. But when you put yourself in that state of elevated imagination, by pretending that there's people out there listening to you, seeing their faces, even if you close your eyes and go, do the whole thing with eyes closed and imagine where you are, that's going to do something to your body, your brain, where you're starting to entertain that idea. Now, the
Hmm.
stress will come into your body, and this is why we do things like rehearsals when I work with one-to-one clients. The stress will start to awaken in your body, and you have to learn how to deal with that. So,
Yeah.
alongside that, you need a practice, which is okay, how do I calm myself down? How do I build the muscle memory of calming myself down? All those sorts of things. But it's about finding those pools of higher stakes each time. So it might be doing it as a rehearsal yourself. Then the next thing is like doing it with some friends. The next
Hmm.
thing is doing it with an invited audience. Next thing is doing it with a slightly bigger one. boom, ba boom, ba boom, like
Yeah.
until that growth zone, naturally evolves. What I see people do is dive straight in the deep end. And
Yeah.
personally, that was harrowing. Like you
Mm,
can do it, but it can feel a little bit like, you're launching into this realm where panic, fear, all of those limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome all come at once. And you're like, oh my God, I can't see the wood from the trees. Where do I start?
yeah.
But I hope that's answering your question
Yeah.
that it's kind of finding the little playgrounds and making them bigger, where are the sort of monkey bars that go from really easy, you're almost standing up, to being over the water and dangling and being like, oh God, the stakes are a little bit higher,
Yeah.
just moving through those grades, I guess.
And I
Yeah.
think that's why people think they don't like public speaking, is
Yeah.
because 9 times out of 10, it's they get offered an opportunity that's maybe a bit bigger than they're ready for, and they jump
Mm.
for it and then go, oh God, that felt horrible.
Yeah,
My
that was
knees were
hell.
shaking. Yeah, my knees were shaking, my mouth was dry, and that was
Yeah.
awful. Whereas I think back now, and I've done some in-person speaking. In-person speaking used to terrify me. So I would have
Mm.
my little workshops be my comfort zone. And then I was pointed out that when I first started with my online speaking, I was terrified then too. And it was just the evolution almost of
Mm.
where I felt comfortable. And as you said, I absolutely did rehearsal and worked with friends, but I
Yeah.
also had a maximum of 10 people come to the group the first time I did a workshop,
Perfect.
then 30, and it slowly but surely kind of grew until I ended up doing a in-person event in front of nearly 200 people. And
Ah,
if you had
amazing.
told right and if you had told me it like even a year prior that I was going to do that, I would have been like, oh no, I don't like
Mm.
public speaking, I couldn't do that. And yeah, I just think that most of the time the opportunities that present themselves when they're given to you by someone else, it's on their terms
Yes.
instead of being able to create something that feels like a little hop, a little baby step for
Yeah.
yourself, and then looking into and accepting those opportunities once you've grown, once you feel ready to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see is people thinking it's completely out of their control. And there'll be a diva if they ask for something, like
Yeah,
a podcast, for example. Now,
yeah,
if this was something that I didn't feel comfortable with, or I felt a bit like, oh, this world is new, I would ask you for the questions before
yeah,
and be like, right, let's see if I can practice them or see what might come out my mouth. I might just set it up with the mic and everything, get into the zone. You have certain things that you can ask for. You can ask for water, you can ask for a
yeah.
tech test, you can ask to be last in makeup so that you're not there at 4 in the morning, as I've had some clients do. And then they're hanging around all day. And I thought, hang on a
Yeah,
second, this isn't okay. You can design, as you say, those little steps. And I think because we kind of put it out to the universe, then we think, right, we want to be great public speakers. These big opportunities come our way, and we go, oh my God. And it's a test, really, isn't it? It's like, are you ready? And actually,
yeah,
there's loads of stuff that I'm like, thank God that didn't pay off because I wouldn't have been ready and I would have made a, sort of arse of myself at the time. And now I feel like I've earned it. That's the
yeah.
other thing, isn't it? Is like not just being the great speaker who hasn't earned that platform.
And I just wanted to go back as well. You were talking about the things that you can ask for, and I want to give perspective as someone who does host
Mm.
podcasts and has guests come along. I think people are scared to ask because they're afraid of how it's going to look, and it'll
Ah,
make them
yeah.
look unprepared, or it'll make them look like I don't know, that they're nervous. There's something about the perception of asking. I would
Mm.
not blink an eyelid if somebody asked me for a copy of the questions beforehand.
There you
I
have
would
it.
not blink an eyelid if someone said, "Oh, I'm really sorry, can I start this phrase again?" Like, this is an edited show. There
There
is
you go.
more than enough opportunity to kind of take a minute. And there's nothing bad about that. Like, I stutter, I restart my sentences time and
Yeah.
time and time again. That's just how I naturally speak. And yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to perform in these settings. And it's
Mm.
like the less of that that can come into play, the better. And
Yeah.
really, the perception of you isn't going to change because you've gone, oh, at the beginning of your sentence.
Exactly. Well, let's look at why that happens then, because there's a few different reasons, I
Yeah,
think. So,
let's.
the number one reason I think why we go, oh my God, the pressure is so great, is because there's a big part of ourselves biologically, it's in our evolution that our number one drive is for connection with other people.
Mm,
And one of the biggest methods of forging connection is through the way we communicate, how we build rapport, how we connect with people, how we're vulnerable, how we ask for the needs to be met, all of those sort of things. When we were in caves and in tribes, this meant life or death if we
Yeah.
didn't build that connection. But now what we have is we're in this environment which is pretty cushy. So rather than us thinking, okay, I'm not a good communicator, we're thinking I'm not a perfect communicator. And we
Yeah.
associate it with things like self-worth. Like, I stumble, I say filler words, whatever, are all associated with this idea of imperfection, which we attribute to things like bodies and, with the way we look and beauty and all of these sorts of things. But we're attributing it to language too. It's very sort of
Yeah.
insidious. And we're going, oh, because I didn't say that or get a laugh or I didn't hit this many likes, I'm a bad person. The other part of that, this fear of judgment that we have, and actually this drive towards judgment that we're fostering. So I don't know whether I said this before in the last conversation that we had, but things like moments like where Molly May said something, that was silly and out of touch, but it's not the worst thing that anyone's ever said.
Hmm.
And the complete, like, just deluge of hate that happened. And
Yeah.
so she was the example of what happens if you speak and get it wrong.
Yeah.
And it was like everyone just went, see, I'm going to be
This
that.
is why I'm afraid. Yeah, that's a
This
good
is why I'm
point.
afraid. And so I just thought, like, yeah, of course you can join in and say, yeah, what a stupid thing to say, or how out of touch, or how terrible. But you can also see that there's someone at home who thinks about what they speak about all the time. They're so afraid they've got to go over it in their mind all the time to get it right. And then they see that and they go, see, this is what happens if you
Yeah.
just relax and express yourself. There's those two things I think that are happening, the world that we're in and the world that we've been in.
Mm. That's really
Um,
interesting. I just want to prompt people who are watching, who are thinking about and maybe worried about this idea, to go and take a look at a different podcast episode that we did when you finished this one. I had a wonderful lady on the show called Isis. She focuses in around cancel culture, and we had
Ooh,
probably around 2 hours worth of conversation that I had to battle to try and get down into a podcast
oh my
because
gosh.
she was fascinating, and the whole concept was really interesting. And we were by no means saying like say whatever you want and don't worry about what people's
Exactly.
thoughts are. But yeah, if you're somebody watching and what Charlotte just said resonated and you do have those concerns, go and take a look. It might give you a little bit of a
Mm.
different perspective. But I wanted to spin back around as well because you were mentioning the idea of being a perfect speaker. And we've talked about earlier on, even like vocabulary and like saying the right thing, saying the clever thing. I truly don't think it's even about what you say. I think to me, a good speaker is somebody who I'm engaged in, and I will sit
Mm.
and listen to stories on like TikToks, the story times that I have no tie to, and I don't really care for the outcome, but the story is just so engaging. And the way they're speaking is so authentic that I'm
Mm.
sold. I'm in. I'm their new biggest fan, even though what they're talking about doesn't really relate to me. I
Oh,
think
that's
there's a lot to be
interesting.
said for that. Like you just being a really authentic speaker can actually make you a much better speaker than a well-researched one.
That's really interesting because I think we do buy things because of the package that they come in. So a little while ago, there was a big resurgence of yoga. Yoga teachers, 10 a penny. They were everywhere. But actually, there were the people who you went to because you like their voice.
Hmm.
Because you like the way they put things. You like the way that the fact that they swore, the fact that they came over and held your hand, or you like the way that they didn't talk about the spiritual side of it, or you loved the way they talk about the spiritual side of it.
Hmm.
So we each have these preferences. And again, I think it comes back to that idea of, I think this is why that word of tribe has come back as well, like
Yeah,
finding your tribe, because it's about the people who perhaps just make you feel a little bit at home and in
yeah.
that tribe. And it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, there's been a lot of people that I think TikTok is a great place for this actually, because I heard about this guy who was talking about bugs in a museum or something and went viral. And
Oh,
I just thought, isn't that perfect? And it's like the guy who, I've forgotten his name now, who was the train spotter.
oh, Francis.
That's it, Francis.
Francis.
I was about to call him Maurice, which was very Beauty and the Beast. But like, there's someone for everyone. And I
Hmm.
think as long as there's variety, I think the more variety that we can have and the more it, that's being expressive and musicality and
Yeah.
tone, intonation, all of these sorts of things that are at your disposal, the more you kind of paint with all those colors, the more exciting it's going to be. And actually, it's useful to the people who perhaps are very expressive already and worry about their content, and vice versa. The people who have their content kind of down and they're really knowledgeable, they need to be a little bit wary of the fact that they can get stuck in their head. So it's about borrowing from each other as well. So I think that's interesting that you're starting to log the people that engage you. And maybe it's just asking, okay, why do they engage me? What are they doing with their body, their breath, their voice? All of those sorts of things are a really nice way
Mm.
of building the awareness of what you like.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's helpful for even how to position your content. Like I know we're talking about
Mm,
speaking specifically today, but I often have people do that exercise for their editing and for their written word as well, is to go back to whatever platform you're used to scrolling on and
mm,
look at it as a creator, not a consumer. And sometimes just
mm,
that change in perspective, whether it's how someone speaks or how someone writes a caption or even the graphic that they use. Like, what is it that you like? What are the things that
mm,
make you tick? And paying attention to those really does help with just being present, I think, actually, if we
mm.
zoom back in every part of your business can be really helpful.
Mm, mm. The other thing that I was going to talk about was the word authenticity. I want your perspective on this actually,
Yeah.
because I feel like this is such a huge word of now that
Yeah.
we've gone, sort of 70% of consumers are distrusting
Hmm.
of the big kind of brands and things like that. They don't want to be sold to anymore. There's this feeling of like, I want the authentic thing. What do you see as like authentic online?
Oh, I really struggle with this because
Mm,
I think you can have different masks for different parts of your life, right? And I'm never going to
mm.
look like on my social media what I look like in a conversation or a brunch with my friends. There are
Yeah.
going to be certain differences and certain ways that I show up. So it is a difficult thing because I don't want people to think that I'm trying to insinuate when I talk about authenticity that you've got to be the same and you've just got to show up as the same
Yes.
in every way because I don't agree with that. And like, for example, I swear like a sailor. And I try to censor myself a little bit on my socials and on my podcasts or wherever I'm showing up. And not because I think swearing is wrong, just because I never
Mm.
have in a work environment. And I feel unauthentic to just throw in
Yes.
like a swear word for the sake of it. Whereas if I'm chatting to my friends, it would feel inauthentic to censor myself. So I think you've got to take the cues of what feels natural in each place, in
Yeah.
each environment. But for me, the authenticity is taking on board the things that you like and you don't like that people are doing on social media, taking on board the strategies that you want to implement and
Mm.
letting them sit and almost letting them sink in and
Mm.
bringing forward parts of your personality that are relevant, that help you get what you want out of there. Because at the end of the day, we are running businesses, we are showing up online for a reason, not just to show
Mm.
up and have fun. It's also to promote ourselves and what we do. So,
Mm.
yeah, I have a really conflicted, you can probably hear me talking around in circles about it because I
No,
find it really conflicting.
but it's not binary, is I
Yeah,
think is what you're saying there, that it's not as simple as we
as a
first
tick
think.
box. Yeah,
Yes, let's be authentic. Tick.
yeah,
Because I agree. I think there are environments where you don't want to switch certain parts of that vocabulary on. It's like if we didn't, imagine like how we would talk around children.
yeah,
That's a consideration of your audience that you're talking about there as well. Is
yeah,
you're thinking, actually, will this distract them from the
exactly.
point I'm trying to
Exactly.
make?
Hmm.
Will this kind of conflict or do I need it? Whereas with your friends, it's a reflection of the laissez-faire, laid back, like rapport build and possibly like in the world of like banter and all of those sorts of things
Yeah.
that you feel you can be cheeky, like unadulterated
Yeah.
with one another. You've built that relationship and they're deserving of it. And that's where
Yeah.
it becomes muddy on social media, right? Is because you're like, who
Yeah.
you talking to? That's
And
why it's really important to decide who you're talking to.
yeah, and you know what? When I think back, I will say at every point of my journey on social media, I will tell you that I'm being authentically myself. I've never
Mm.
tried to put on a show. But when I look back, who I see in the content that I created years ago is not the same as how I show up and what I talk
Mm.
about now. That doesn't mean I was putting on a front. I just was prepared to show different points of myself, and maybe I wasn't as comfortable as I am now. Yeah, I find the whole thing, I do think it is important to be authentic, but find the whole thing really hard to put your finger on because it's
Yeah,
not as simple. It's not black and white as
yeah.
just, yeah, like we said, that yes, this was authentic or X. No, it's not.
Exactly. There are influences, and I think that's what people forget is they think, as you said before, this central me is unmoving. And of
Hmm.
course it's not. I kind of drew this example with a client the other day who was coming up with a talk, and naturally they made this sort of metaphor or visual image. They said they have their anchors, the things that kind of keep them grounded. Then there's the boat, which is them, if you like. And then there's the sea, which some days can be like a mill pond, and some days it can be,
Yeah.
the choppiest thing. But you're still sailing. It's just a
Yeah.
different type of sailing that you need for that calmer sea versus the rougher one. You're more alert, you're more awake to certain things that are coming at you. That would be potentially like a Q&A that you're thinking, yeah, okay, there's a lot of things that are up to the gods here.
Yeah.
I don't know what questions are going to come my way. This is a mill pond where you're talking to a friend and you've got a really long relationship and it's quite easy. Now, in those situations, those anchors, you probably have to concentrate on being like heavier or lighter in those situations, right?
Mm.
Or kind of, can you pull up the anchor if you're just kind of milling around and
Yeah.
happily bobbing along the sea versus, wow, I really need to. This is, you can tell that I'm not a sailor. This is,
It's
this is
working
me.
well. I'm with you.
And I'm just like seeing this like tiny sort of Pixar little
Yeah.
boat in the sea, but
Just
like
bobbing
dropping
around.
anchor. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I just keep thinking about that. It's like, okay, if your anchor is something like speaking to your therapist, going to yoga, eating well, all of those sorts of things, you need to make sure you've got all of those, or, man the deck. I'm also watching that program at the moment called Our Flag Means Death by Taiki Waititi.
Oh, I
And
haven't
so I've
seen
got
it.
all of these, oh, they're like really funny pirates. So I've got all of these images going around my head at the same time. But yeah, I think it's a really good way of just recognizing that it's not the same sea every time.
Yeah.
And so that idea of authenticity, yeah, it's the same boat, but you're going to have to bring different skills or different strategies to sail.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And we're running out of time, so I wanted to kind of touch
Oh
on
my gosh, that
something.
flew.
I know it's flying by, but I wanted to touch on something before we ended because I have this perspective about the way people speak and how people use speaking in sales calls or when talking to clients. And I truly don't think I've ever worked with or ever met anyone who is better at selling and better at converting clients in written word than they are in speaking. I think that the conversational
Oh,
element
yeah.
always makes people connect more or always makes people more successful. And when I look back at the people that I've worked with, when they're testing out their different sales processes and their different routes to market, 9 times out of 10, even if they're not doing sales calls, they're doing voice messages through
Mm,
DMs. They're like utilizing the tone and the even non-verbal cues that they're
yeah.
able to by having a person-to-person communication versus like dropping somebody a quick little text message or
Mm,
drafting up a proposal, whatever it may be.
mm,
And even people who think they're really bad at it and think like, oh, I'm not a natural speaker, they are always 10 times better at
yeah.
this spoken element and more convincing at the spoken element that they are in written. And I just wanted to know whether you think there's a reason for that or whether you think it's just more to do with like our natural connection being better through video and through speaking.
There's a couple of things. Text isn't that old in
Yeah,
comparison to language.
good
Like,
point. Yeah, I wouldn't have
just,
thought of that.
yeah, as you were talking then, I was like, why don't we? Do you know what's funny is I don't ever think of sales as being written. And
Yeah.
that just dawned on me. I was like, gosh, yeah, but of course it is. If I've ever had a conversation with someone like a potential client, it is all through that conversation that then and there. And I don't think I even send anything afterwards. I just go through listening. That's what it is. There's so many elements of this that are about listening to
Mm.
your client, the person that's in front of you, and deducing whether you are the right person to help. So when someone comes for a sales call, I would say 80% of that is you listening.
Yeah, that's the rule I teach. So, and I hadn't
Oh,
even put two and two
great.
together there. But yeah, I say 80-20 is listening and 20% is asking questions actually. So prompting
There we
more
go.
listening.
Yeah, because actually it's not useful for either of you if you can't help them. Because
Yeah.
you won't have fun. You'll be constantly pushing that boulder up the hill. And I know that people have to pay bills and things like that, but find another way until you meet
Mm.
those people that you can help or test different means of helping. But I think that's probably two of the reasons. So text isn't that old. 80% of it is listening. And then the other part of it is that conversation is them, those first impressions really stick.
Yeah.
They take about zero point 0.10 seconds to form and they take about 20 minutes to change. So you have to do a lot of work to
Mm.
push past a first impression. So they're also getting a lot of information about you. And we believe as humans that we're really good at deducing whether someone's lying or could be
Yeah.
trustworthy or whatever, which is terrible because actually we're quite bad at it. And so this is why we've got all these cult leaders and things like that, because they're so charismatic and they're so
Yeah.
believable and genuine. This is why I always say, what is authentic? I want to dig into
Yeah.
that. So we believe we're sussing people out and going, can I have a relationship with this person? Can they help me? But of course, a percentage of that is correct. You'll know in your heart of hearts whether they've listened to you, whether they are saying the things back in the diagnostic and all of those sorts of things. And,
Mm.
and the strategy they come up with is one that aligns with what you had in mind. So, yeah, it's really interesting that you do the 80-20 rule. I love
Mm.
that.
Yeah. And I wonder as well, as you were saying that, I wonder whether there's anything to do with how much more practiced we are at speech. Like learning sales processes, learning how to market yourself, learning how to sell yourself has probably only come from at least the at the very earliest the start of your career, if not the start of your business. But we've been learning how to communicate and how to get people to agree with you and how to read the room and these all these social cues and things we've been learning since we were children. So I wonder whether
Yeah.
there's something to it there as well. It's more embedded in us to be able to pick things up
Mm.
like that through spoken than it is through written.
It is, and I would say if you don't use it, you lose it. This is one
Mm.
of the things that I see with people who dive into building their knowledge is then they're not when they're not voicing it out loud, they're sort of losing all those skills that you were just talking about, or when they cut themselves off and they're like, no, I've just got to work on my business or my studies or whatever. They're
Yeah.
losing those skills of trusting that what they're going
Hmm.
to say out loud is going to be useful, meaningful. And if it's not, it doesn't matter. So
Yeah.
the stakes kind of build if we let that kind of pressure cooker of like, oh God, I haven't spoken in so long. It's kind of like, do you ever have that feeling where you go to the library or you're on your laptop all day and then you speak to the first person and you're like, whoa, it's
That
the
was
first
loud.
person that was loud or unregulated or my voice croaked or whatever. It's because
Yeah.
we're out of practice. Now, if I said to you, go run a marathon tomorrow and you'd done marathons in the past, there's a certain amount of skill. Like say you'd had a long period of time where you hadn't been running or whatever.
Hmm.
If I then said, oh, go and run that marathon, there's a certain amount of you that, yeah, would still know how to do that. But the resilience, the actual fitness, that's what I talk about a lot is social fitness is kind of dwindling. So you might then be more inclined to get injured, or your voice might crack, or you might be thinking, gosh, why was that so full of effort? It's just that
Yeah.
unpracticed skill. So I'm a massive advocate for practicing those sorts of things.
Yeah. Love that. Well, before we hop off, I wanted to ask first off just where people can find you, where they can connect with you best, and also if you've got anything exciting coming up that you want to tell the people watching at home.
Sure. My two favorite places to get out there is Instagram and LinkedIn. So on Instagram, I'm Charlotte Lewis Consultant. All, well, I was going to say all one word, but they all are, all lowercase. And LinkedIn, it's Charlotte Lewis, and you'll see a picture of me and a talking head.
We'll
And
pop the
then
link below as well.
thank you. And
Of
then
course.
the exciting things that are coming up. Do you know, I'm just looking forward to working with more clients this year. So I am taking on new clients. I wasn't for a little while. So that's exciting to me. So if anyone's listening to this and they go, I want to learn more, you can book in things like a discovery call
Yeah.
via my Calendly and things. So yeah, get to deducing whether I'm the right person for you.
Yeah, and as I said, I'll pop those links in the description below so they're all nice and easy for you
Perfect.
to find. And I just wanted to sign off with a massive thank you. I've had so much fun talking about this with you.
Me too. I love it. And I love seeing it from your perspective as well and seeing that it actually works in marketing. It's useful in marketing. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
great.
100%. It works. Well, I want to just push out as well for people, please do go and follow Charlotte and tell her that we sent you if you do.
Ah,
Thanks very much, everybody. Bye.
take care.